Started off with, I think it's important to go into the history of Gaza, a little bit of background. It really kind of shows what Gaza actually is and who lives there. So I'm sure you guys have all seen this 1,000 times, so I don't think we can show it enough. This is the lands of Palestine and what's happening in the last pretty much 100 years really. Zionism started in very early 20th century. As you all know, Gaza's down in the bottom left-hand corner. That only goes to 2000. It shows a few Israeli settlements. In 2005, the Israelis fully withdrew from Gaza. But I'll get to that in a second. So it's just a small strip with a population of about 1.5 million. This is a map of where everyone lives, and as you can see, most people live in refugee camps. And that might not be the best one, but there's about 8 major refugee camps which house at least 60-70% of the population in Gaza. In terms of Perth, that's the size of Gaza. Perth has a population of about 1.5 million as well. And so as you can see, it goes up just off of Duncraig down to about Coogee and about as wide as Perth. So it's an incredibly densely populated area. And that area has to sustain all the farming and agriculture of Gaza as well. And so it's not just houses, there are open spaces where they try and grow as much food really as they can. So Gaza kind of came to be in 1947. That was the first this one here is the first real reference to Gaza. Gaza Strip. Before that there was Gaza City, but there was no strip. That was the original partition plan that the Israelis and the Palestinians were presented with by the British. And that's the first time kind of Gaza came to be. When the Israelis declared independence, or al-Nakba as it's known by the Palestinians, or the Arabs, which means the disaster, or the catastrophe, in 1960, Israel claimed pretty much up until these borders there. From 1949 to 1967, Gaza was ruled by the Egyptians. And in 1967, in the Six-Day War, when the Israelis occupied the Golan Heights, the West Bank, Gaza and Sinai, they obviously claimed control of Gaza. They ended up giving the Sinai back to the Egyptians, but maintained Gaza. And so Gaza's population really came in 2 waves. First in 1948, when they declared independence, in 1949, there was a huge rush of refugees to Gaza. And there was a second wave of refugees to Gaza when the Israelis occupied the rest of Palestine in 1967. And so pretty much everybody there has only been there for not much more than 60 years. So all housing is quite densely populated, huge families going into small buildings. There's not much room there to live in. And so then in 2000, so this is, just going to go through it, 67 they occupied the Gaza, and they've maintained occupation until 2005 when they unilaterally withdrew. Why did they withdraw? They didn't withdraw for the good of the Gazans or as any kind of peace offering. They withdrew because the Israeli policy is to force Palestinians into as densely populated, so from rural areas into densely populated urban areas, pretty much slums, where they can then allow them to, they say they allow autonomy. That just means they don't police the areas. So they pretty much put a wall around these small areas and so they can do whatever they want inside. They don't allow them to have any sort of defence, security, trade, or they don't have any power over their water because most of the water comes from the rest of the occupied territory. So Israel withdrew from the area, which actually made the situation quite a bit worse for the Gazans. In 2006 they had the Palestinian elections, which Hamas, they won. It doesn't matter what you think about Hamas's politics, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what they do, but they won the elections, they were democratic elected government. They're no longer a terrorist organisation. They've come a long way since they were originally created. But originally the Americans and the Israelis had pressured Hamas to participate in these elections. They didn't want to participate, but they were pretty much forced to. They then won, and I've spoken to Hamas officials who said they demanded a recount after they won because they didn't want power. They didn't know what to do with it. But they said, right, we've been elected, we're going to rule. In a few months after the elections, most Hamas elected officials were either arrested or killed, and Fatah said, we're not going to give you power. That had some pretty brutal infighting between Fatah and Hamas in the West Bank and Gaza. And eventually, Gaza was claimed by Hamas and Fatah claimed the West Bank. And that's the way it's stayed ever since. And because apparently Hamas is a terrorist group, they put a siege on Gaza. They said to stop rockets, but they also stopped everything. Household goods, fuel, medicine, food, nothing goes in and out of Gaza. And then in 2009, the Israelis launched one of the most brutal wars of its history, which is saying something. They killed over 1,400 people in just a few short weeks. 1 in 4 were children. That's the list of the names of the dead from the Operation Cast Lead, a quarter of which were children, most of which were civilian. Israel likes to say there was 400 Hamas fighters killed, but at least 75% of them were policemen. So whether or not you want to declare them fighters or not, I mean, they probably had arms because they're policemen, but they weren't much more than that. And the siege on Gaza, the Cast Lead was justified in order to stop the 8,500 rockets that had been fired from Gaza into Israel in the 8 years prior. 8,500 rockets is a lot, but a lot of these rockets aren't much more than a firework. They claimed the lives of 20 civilians, Israeli civilians, and I don't justify the rockets. I think they're stupid, they're counterproductive, and they're murdering civilians. But to put these 20 lives in perspective, in the same 8 years, Israeli strikes in Gaza killed 1,700 Palestinians. So make of that what you will. The siege of Gaza is deliberate, and it has its effect on the people of Gaza is carefully planned. The Israelis know exactly what they're doing to the population. This is from a leaked State Department cable, which says that Israeli officials admit that they intend to keep Gaza's economy functioning at the lowest possible level, consistent with avoiding humanitarian crisis. It's up to you whether you think there is actually a humanitarian crisis there, but the Israelis don't seem to think there is, and they say, pretty much short of wiping out 1.5 million people, we want to keep them as poor and suffering as possible. The plan of the overall embargo is to keep the Gaza economy on the brink of collapse without ever pushing it over the edge. I think it's important to bring up the Viva Palestina. This is what kind of inspired me to go on the convoy. It's a huge part of Palestinian advocacy now. So there's several attempts to break the siege on Gaza since 2006, the most infamous, I should say, of which is last year in May when a flotilla was attacked by the Israeli army. 9 activists were murdered, these 9, including Furkan Dogan, who I met his family. He was only 18 at the time. And 1 more is brain dead and should theoretically count as a victim. The attacks aboard the Viva Palestina are gruesome, but I think it's a really important issue because they display the brutality of the IDF, as well as the complete lack of accountability in the Israeli regime and the complete disrespect of humanitarian law. They just don't care. And after speaking to several people that were aboard the Viva Palestina and families of the victims, it's become quite a personal issue for me. And so when I saw a BBC Panorama documentary called Death in the Med, which was about the flotilla, this really kind of pissed me off, to be honest. BBC I thought was quite reputable, but apparently not. Israeli reports and the BBC Panorama tried to justify Israel's actions in the face of aggression of political activists. They argued that soldiers fired in self-defense, used paintball pellets, not live rounds, did not aim to kill. They were attacked with sticks and knives while firing. The flotilla was not humanitarian. It was running a legal blockade of Gaza, and finally Israel has the right to protect itself. They were excuses that the Israeli army used. The truth, however, is much different, and this has all come out afterwards. Evidence now proves that the ship was attacked in international waters in the middle of the night. Why would you do that if you want to minimise casualties? Why would you attack them? The soldiers fired from the helicopters before they boarded the Viva Palestina. They weren't attacked first, they fired from the helicopters. They aimed to kill, and they fired at close range at the targets. And this is displayed because 3 of the victims were shot in the back of the head at close range. They were executed. A further 3 were also shot in other parts of the body at close range. A total of 5 of the 9 people were shot in the back. If you want to call that self-defense, then you can, but it doesn't sound like it to me. The blockade on Gaza is not recognised as legal by any country in the world except for Israel. Australia has declared it illegal. This has been so what happened on the Viva Palestina has been proven a war crime. There was a UN Human Rights Commission investigation they released their findings, which said the conduct of the Israeli military and other personnel towards the flotilla passengers was not only disproportionate, but demonstrated levels of totally unnecessary and incredible violence. It betrayed an unacceptable level of brutality. Such conduct cannot be justified or condoned on security or any other grounds. It constituted a grave violation of human rights. They call for prosecution of Israeli soldiers for willful killing, torture or humane treatment, and willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health. That's what the UN says. The Israelis, of course, launched their own investigation, which found that they did nothing wrong. They committed a few mistakes, but nobody should be held accountable for 9 deaths. So I went to the West Bank in January last year, and it was an amazing experience, and I really wanted to go. I left with the feeling that I had to go back and do something more. There was a couple of months when I got back and nothing really kind of came up, and then the Marvin Mara attacks happened, and they really kind of showed me that I had to go back and try and do something. So I started looking around, and I found an organisation called Viva Palestina, which is led by a former British MP called George Galloway, and he wanted to send a convoy across Europe to Gaza. So I sent a few emails off, and I didn't hear anything back for about 6 or so weeks. And about 8 days before the convoy was scheduled to leave London, I was told that I could come. It was a huge rush, getting ready to go, but eventually I got there, and a couple of days later I was in London, ready to go. That's a bit later on. There was 3 simultaneous convoys that were planned as part of the Viva Palestina convoy to Gaza. One set off from London, and we drove through France, Italy, Greece, Turkey and Syria. There was another convoy from North Africa, and another from the Gulf States. So we passed through Paris, Lyon, Milan, Ancona, Thessaloniki, Alexandropolis, Istanbul, and a few others' names I can't pronounce. We were always well received by local Palestinian advocacy groups, and they put us up and housed us, often in basketball courts or just gave us a bit of grass to camp on. We were fed the entire way. It was absolutely amazing the support we got. Every single city we went to, there was a rally, and we just drove around and made as much noise as possible. And the local organisers always had a few speakers, and yeah, it was just amazing going through Europe, the support that we got. And then, so we went through France to Italy, we got a boat to Greece, and then we crossed into Turkey. Turkey was something else, took it to a new level. The Turks feel this situation as much, if not more than pretty much anybody else except Palestinians, because all 9 of the dead aboard the Marvin Mara were Turkish. And this was the first kind of effort to get into Gaza since the raids. So we spent 5 days in Turkey, staying pretty much wherever they put us up. We were fed and amazingly well. Our convoy was led by IHH, or IHH, which is an amazing organisation if you want to look it up. It's declared a terrorist organisation by Israeli, but it seems like everyone is these days. So everyone there was Turkish, and so it was just an absolutely amazing experience. They're all part of IHH, and so IHH really got behind us. We went through 5 days, spent 5 days going through town after town. It was amazing. We spent time with victims' families, went to a few commemorative services for the victims from Marvin Mara. And it was definitely the most touching thing about the whole experience was meeting the family of the victims aboard the Marvin Mara and kind of their views on it. And while the receptions in Turkey were amazing, Syria took it to extremes. This is Syria. We passed through the border at about 5 p.m. to find a huge reception. There was estimates were about 5,000 or 6,000 people. We were supposed to get there at 12, so they'd been waiting for 5 hours for us to arrive, which would have pissed me off. We were greeted by thousands of people. Mostly, there was a whole bunch of senior Syrian officials, the vice president, a whole bunch of Hamas leaders. It was quite an experience being greeted by a dictator and leaders of a political party mostly recognised as a terrorist organisation. I had no idea what to expect once we got to Syria, and this was not what I expected. We were seated amongst all the leaders and officials. We were given ridiculous amounts of cake. They brought around huge cakes and just offered us cake and juice all day. Obviously they don't drink much in Syria, so there was no alcohol for celebrations, but enough cake. We had to stay for speeches, music and dancing until late into the night, and eventually we left. We then drove to a place called Latakia, We went a terrible way. We went via Lebanon. It took us about 5 hours to drive about 20 kilometres. Went via Lebanon, I have no idea why. And we spent our time in Syria in a Palestinian refugee camp in Latakia. Shortly after we arrived, we were joined by the convoys from North Africa and the Gulf states. The convoy now had 147 vehicles and roughly 430 people. We'd only planned to be in Syria for 6 or 7 days. That would just be enough time to organise the aid we have, which amounted to $5 million, and organise transport, so a boat that would take us to Al Arish in Egypt. We ended up staying for over 2 weeks. We organised the aid, which took much longer than we thought we would. We had to meet some ridiculous criteria from the Egyptian customs agencies. Everything had to be labelled, boxed, packaged, wrapped, put on pallets. Just the list went on. And we were told we were only allowed taking medical aid. We planned to take in mostly medical aid anyway. It just wasn't too much of a problem, but we ended up taking a lot of educational stuff anyway, which once we got to Egypt, they overlooked. The extended stay in Latakia was frustrating. We all wanted to get going, get to Gaza, but it was all equally amazing. We spent our free time, I should say, playing soccer. We organised soccer games with the Palestinians. We went to local houses for dinner. We explored the local restaurants and markets. Me and another convoy member even got to go to the local university with one of the local Palestinian girls called Russia. We went to an economics class, and it was in Arabic, so I didn't understand much, but it was great. It was amazing to see how similar the Syrians and the Palestinians' way of life is with ours. So we went to this lecture, and after 10 minutes, about half of the guys in the class had already left. Several had their earphones in, were listening to music. A few had fallen asleep. The rest were playing games on laptops, just solitaire on their laptops. Russia, the local Palestinian girl, taught me how to write my name in Arabic, and I wrote it all over the front cover of her book until she realised that my name, Nick, is a word that I'm not going to repeat in Arabic, and so I just desecrated her book. We were treated like royalty in the Palestinian refugee camp. And a refugee camp is not what you might think of tents like you see in African countries. These people have been there for 60 years. There are houses, they're quite well established. But their stay there is temporary, and they know that. And the Syrians, people say it's a dictatorship, whatever you want to call it. They treat the Palestinians like nobody else in the world. They're allowed full rights, except they're not allowed a passport, and they're not allowed to run for high office. But they are treated amazingly well by the Syrians. But they understand that it's temporary, they want to go back to their homeland, and the entire the feel is just of waiting for somebody in the West to stand up and do something and let them go back. I'll never forget the hospitality, and a few of us plan to go back in a few months just to visit this area again, and we spend 2 weeks there and made some great friends. We eventually got given the okay to embark for Egypt, but we're handed a list of 17 names of people that were not allowed to come to Egypt. One of them was George Galloway, the leader of the convoy. That was a big blow to the convoy. This was particularly heartbreaking for the other 16 people, of which only a few had ever been to Gaza before. They'd spent about a month trying to get to this point and just really wanted to make it in. Obviously, some of the names were put on there by random. A few were obvious mistakes. One woman, Amina, was barred because apparently she was married to one of the leaders of the convoy. Amina had never been married, but someone later realised that George Galloway's first wife was called Amina, and so clearly they just assumed that that was her, and she was not allowed to come. We tried arguing with the Egyptians for quite a while over that point, but they never gave in, and so the 17 weren't allowed to come. We had one final we finally organised a ship. That's tough. We organised a ship that could take all the people and all the boats, all the cars. But we had one final hurdle when the ship's captain did a backflip and said that only 30 people of the 430 were allowed to go on the boat. That was, a huge setback. The rest had to make their own way there. We ended up organising a charter flight, or 2 charter flights, which ferried the 400 people remains. I was allowed to go on the boat. I was chosen, which was amazing. The trip aboard the ship. So that was, this is the kind of greeting we've got in Syria. This is our leader speaking, Kevin Overton, speaking to the Syrian people. This was the reception we got when we boarded the ship in Latakia. So there was only 30 of us on the ship, and it was quite an intense 40 hours. while we're on there, we set up watches. As you can see, I was sitting in this post watching. We spotted several warships around, which isn't unusual for the Israeli sea. They might not have even been following us, but just that threat was always there. There was constant drones overhead. It was quite intimidating, but they stayed away. Pretty much because of what happened on the Mavi Marmara. This is where the Mavi made amazing inroads. The Israelis are too afraid to stop ships they know are humanitarian. They can't do it anymore. And so we arrived at El Arish in the end. We had to clear customs, and then we had to wait for everyone to arrive from the airplanes. Eventually they did, and we were free to drive the last 40 kilometres into Gaza. So El Arish is just south of the Gaza Strip on the Mediterranean. The Egyptians had set a criteria that we weren't allowed to come in overland. We had to arrive by sea in Egypt. Nobody knows exactly why, but that was just something they said, and so that's why we had to get the boat from Syria to Egypt. The mood was absolutely amazing. We'd spent about 4 or 5 weeks at this stage getting to this point, and we were just about to arrive in Gaza. We drove the 40 kilometres from El Arish to Rafah, and there was people along the road, Egyptians along the road most of the way. It was absolutely amazing to see. On arrival in Rafah, we were given the official welcoming party. But that's not the official one. The official one was all the dignitaries and people. There was a few hundred people, and they met us and had a few speeches and everything. But we were all really excited just to get into Gaza itself. And then just after dark, we left the border area and went into Gaza. This is a few photos that I took from the top of the van that I was driving. We arrived in Gaza and we drove for just over an hour. The streets were lined 2 or 3 deep like that for the entire time. By the end of the hour, we were absolutely exhausted, surprisingly tiring, but they just kept on partying all night. Gaza's not a very big place, but it took us about an hour to get across it because there were so many people. We spent 3 days in Gaza, in which time we attended several official functions. Hamas loves their functions. They love their cake, and their functions are ridiculous. A few of us tried to sneak away and see some of Gaza for ourselves. We listened to a lecture from one of the heads of the BDS campaign from Gaza itself, which was absolutely amazing. And his main argument was that the Palestinians don't want our aid and they don't want any help from us. All they want us to do is stand up for the values which we supposedly support, as in democracy and freedom and equality for everyone. They say if you do that, then we'll look after ourselves. We then went to Samuni Street, which is a street which is now populated almost entirely by children. 48 members of the Samuni family were killed during Operation Cast Lead, not by bombs but by soldiers. They were the fathers of each house were told to come outside, and they were shot at point blank range in front of the children. So this family, the Samuni family it's called now, has a whole street full of children which look after themselves. There's 13, 14-year-old kids who go out and get jobs and look after their siblings. It's quite amazing. I was also invited to go with the 3 organisers, Kevin, Nikki and Zaha, to a prison where Hamas decided to release 17 prisoners in our honour, and 17 to represent the people that weren't allowed to come into Egypt. That was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, going into a prison and a few prisoners being released and walking past us and shaking our hands. That was absolutely just amazing. And on the last day, me and a couple of my mates, mainly an Irish guy who wouldn't give up, he convinced the Hamas minders to let us go and see the tunnels at Rafah. These tunnels are massively misunderstood. They're not smuggling for weapons, they smuggle household goods. We went and we saw a tunnel, which you can, so this is Rafah. Rafah is divided in 3 ways kind of now. There's the Egyptian Rafah, the Gazan Rafah and the border Rafah. So this is Rafah in Gaza. As you can see, there's bullet holes everywhere. This place has been shot at and bombed so many times. It's just amazing. These are the tunnels. You hear much about these tunnels, and I kind of envisioned, say, 3 or 4 tunnels leading from under one house a few kilometres in Gaza to another house in Egypt a few kilometres away. These tunnels operate in broad daylight, no more than 300 metres from the border. They ferry goods back and forward on these canoes, we call them. They're winched back and forward. When we were there, they brought through carpet and metal rebar so they could have a few buildings. I think this is a really important part of Gaza now. You can't really misunderstand it. I'm writing a thesis on it at the moment as well. The tunnels in 2009, the Egyptians said they'd found about 350 tunnels by the middle of the year, which was, you know, they were going to go well past the 500 they found the year before. There's about 1,500 operating at the moment. They don't smuggle arms. The Egyptians said of the 350 they'd found, they'd never once discovered any kind of rocket or small arms being ferried through. It was just household goods, medicine, water, you know, whatever people want. There's even a few tunnels big enough to bring cars through. And the car we drove from Gaza City down to the tunnels was brought through one of the tunnels. These tunnels are really important as well because it costs about 30% on top of the price of the good to come through the tunnel.
Who gets that money?
The tunnels are run kind of half by Hamas and half by just entrepreneurs. This tunnel was dug by a guy, I haven't included his photo, I've tried to not show him too much, he dug it himself about 6 years ago. He's maintained it ever since, and he's got a few helpers, and it's a business, it's a smuggling business. He brings through whatever people want. We actually, he said you can come down the tunnel, and we went down to the Egyptian border, and he said, you know, this crack here this is you're now going to Egypt. And then we crossed a bit further, and there was in 2009, the Americans paid $17 million to sink a 2-inch thick steel wall, the length of, pretty much the length of Rafah. It's called the Philadelphia border, so the Philadelphia Valley. And they sunk this steel wall straight through to cut off all the tunnels. But the guy that took us down was pretty proud of himself that he said it took him 2 hours to get through with an oxy torch. So he spent $17 million, it took him 2 hours to get through it. These guys, you know, they're not terrorists, they're not criminals, they're just they bring in household goods, food and medicine, effectively.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
You know the Egypt end of the tunnels?
Yes.
The authorities obviously know these tunnels exist. Are they getting kickbacks as well from someone to allow it to happen?
You know, it's in the Arab world, so there's a lot of corruption. There would undoubtedly be some sort of kickbacks. For all of the talk about closing the tunnels, there's nobody sees the need to close them. The Israelis don't want to close them because then, you know, there's a chance that these small rockets might not actually make it through, which is a huge propaganda win for the Israelis if they do come through. But also, this is the lifeline for Gaza. These tunnels, they provide everything. Just a few kilometres inside of Gaza, there's something called the Egyptian market in Rafah, which is everything that comes through. And we walked around this market, there was white goods, medicine, food, everything like this. If they closed these tunnels, the Gazans would be pushed over the brink, their economy would collapse. And the Israelis said that they intended to keep the economy on the edge of collapse without ever pushing over the edge. This is what's keeping Gaza afloat. And it's completely changing Gaza. About 5 years ago there was no motorbikes or scooters in Gaza, and now there's hardly any cars. Everyone drives motorbikes and scooters because that's what can be brought through the tunnels easier. Yeah, Chris?
So I wasn't listening from one was it 2002, 2010 with the steel wall?
2009, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So we only had a few days, we only spent 3 days in Gaza. We would all love to spend a lot longer, but the organisers felt that having 430 people was too much of a drain on the economy of Gaza for any more than 3 days. In that 3 days we all did our best to spend as much money as we could. We bought so many trinkets and things that we didn't really want, but just, you know, you want to, when you get there you feel the urge to just spend money to help the local economy. And so we had to leave Gaza, which was, you know, yeah, again, we would have loved to spend more time there. We crossed back at Rafah and we crossed back into Egypt. We spent the entire time under military guard from the Rafah crossing all the way to the Cairo airport. We were told we weren't allowed to leave the Cairo airport until we got a flight home. I think it's really the dynamics of the Egyptian situation at the moment and the Palestinian situation is really important. I probably won't go into too much at the moment because I'll just ask a few questions. But so that was an amazing kind of thing to experience, how the Egyptians saw us as people that had gone to Gaza. And so that was the end of the convoy. Going to Gaza really lets you appreciate how the people there are suffering. Under constant bombardment from the IDF, I don't know if any of you how regularly you keep up with news from Gaza, but ever since the Egyptian riots, and more so now with the Libyan riots, there's no attention on Gaza whatsoever. Pretty much daily at the moment, IDF forces go and bomb Gaza every single day. there's bombings. Nobody else is watching, and so they get away with it while they can. The people there have little chance of finding employment. As you saw, for the Israelis deliberately keep the economy on the brink of collapse. Hardly anybody has jobs. People say that, if you're Hamas, you're a terrorist, but Hamas is one of the only people that provide jobs. You can work for Hamas, you can be a policeman, you can be an official. According to the Israelis, that makes you a terrorist. According to common sense, that makes you someone looking for work. The Israelis don't let in building materials, water, fuel. There's rolling blackouts because the Israelis control the only fuel that goes into Gaza. They decide when and when it doesn't go in. There's been times where there's been 3-4 days without any power in Gaza because the Israelis have shut off fuel. This coupled with the young population. There's estimates that say as high as 50% of Gaza is under the age of 18. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but it would definitely be over 30 to 40%, I think. And that's just a dangerous situation. You're breeding a new generation of people that are incredibly hostile to Gaza, to Israel itself, but also these children just don't have a chance to survive, really. Until the Western world stands up for Gaza and Palestine as a whole, the Israelis will continue to commit atrocities like the Marvin Mara raid and Operation Cast Lead. They'll continue to persecute an entire race just for existing on lands that they want. So that's about the end of it. I always think it's important to say that a few things you can do. BDS is so important. I never really knew all that much about it until I went on this flotilla, and on the convoy. It was a big thing. We tried to do as much as we could, which in Western countries is incredibly hard because Coke's on the BDS list, but Coke controls everything. You can't really buy a drink at a shop without buying Coke. But do the best that you can. Participate in community-based things. I think the most important thing that can happen in the Western world is more people turn out to community-based events, because this changes once the rest of the world stops supporting Israel. Israel doesn't stand a chance of continuing its policies. And just go to the West Bank. It's much easier to get into Gaza. You can get into Gaza. I went last year. I didn't really know anything about it. I just flew to Amman in Jordan and tried to cross the Allenby Bridge. I eventually got in. It would have been great to have someone to talk to that has known some of the things that I now know, and I'd be more than willing to talk to anyone who wants to go to the region. And it would be an amazing experience. So, yeah. Thank you.
I'll just make a couple of announcements.